Good evening, and welcome to the American Psychological Association and National PTA webinar, Helping Your Kids Cope with Trauma. We're so glad to have you with us here this evening. My name is Heather Parker, Senior Manager of Health and Safety at National PTA. During this presentation, we will be hearing from Dr. Robin Gurwitch about how to talk to your kids openly and directly about traumatic things happening in schools and communities around the country, and how to know when your kids may need more help than what you can give them. So at the conclusion of this presentation, Dr. Gurwitch will be answering audience questions. Before we dive into the agenda, I want to review a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on National PTA's YouTube channel tomorrow morning. Also, right now I have all attendees on mute. You can enter your questions throughout the presentation in the question and comment box circled here. And then finally, we'll leave time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. So now I would like to introduce National PTA's President-elect, Leslie Boggs, who is going to welcome our attendees and introduce tonight's presenter. Leslie?
Hello, everyone. As the nation's largest volunteer child advocacy association with nearly 4 million members who are parents, students, and educators, National PTA is committed to the health and safety of all youth, from early childhood through adulthood. That is why we are so pleased to provide you with the opportunity to learn directly from child psychologist Dr. Robin Gurwitch on how best to support your child in a world where they are being exposed to traumatic events at an unfortunately high rate. Before we begin, I would like to thank our partners at the American Psychological Association for their support and expert guidance on this issue. I also want to thank all of you, concerned parents, educators, and professionals who work on a daily basis with our youth, for taking the time to join this important conversation. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Robin Gurwitch, a faculty member in the Duke University Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and the Center for Children and Family Health and Disasters. Since the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, Dr. Gurwitch has focused much of her clinical work, training, and research on improving the outcomes and increasing resilience in children who have experienced trauma or crisis events, including terrorism, natural disasters, and stressors related to military deployment. Dr. Gurwitch, thank you so much for taking and sharing your time with us today. We'll turn the presentation over to you now.
Thank you, Leslie. I appreciate being here. I'm going to try and make sure that I've got all my technology going. It is a true pleasure to be here and to talk with you about something that we are facing, as y'all said, on an all too frequent basis. So I think the scariest moment of my life occurred when my daughter was born and they gave her to me and said, "Good luck." Children do not come with manuals, and so it's often hard when these kinds of events happen to know what to do. We don't have that turn to chapter 5 on how to support children after traumatic events. And as much as we would like to wrap our arms around our children and hope that nothing bad ever happens to them, the world doesn't work that way, and all too often they are exposed directly themselves, or they hear about it from others. I want to give just a little bit of background about where we are in our understanding about how children understand and process trauma and what we think about that. I'm at an age that I remember the 80s, and at that time it was thought that if children were exposed to trauma, we didn't have to really worry. Any reactions they had would be very mild, they would be transient, they would go away pretty quickly, and we didn't need to do anything. And the reason this is, I believe, is because prior to that time in the 80s, when bad things happened, we tended to ask the adults in their lives, teachers, parents, grandparents, other caregivers, how the children were doing. And what we learned from that is that we're not great at figuring out which children may be having some difficulties. We tend to underestimate for a variety of reasons, one of which is that we always don't know what to look for. We don't always know what to look for, I mean. In the 80s, the thing that changed our view is for the first time there was a traumatic event that occurred, and the people studying the event actually talked to the children themselves. And what they found out is that children had lots to say, and what they were saying is, I'm having a hard time with this and I do need some help because I'm having difficulty coping. And so what we have learned is that when children are exposed to traumatic events, it can throw off a healthy development, and the trajectory of how they're doing seems to be overwhelmed, and they have difficulty coping. But the good news is we can do something about that. As we understand and think about how children understand trauma, one of the things I really want to spend a little bit of time talking about, just so we're all on the same page, is what kind of reactions might children have. This isn't a guarantee. There's no every child will have fill in the blank, but these are some broad categories, some buckets, if you will, of where we may see reactions in children and adolescents. And due to time constraints today, I'm not going to get into specifically a preschool, a child, or an elementary, or an adolescent, but just give broad brushstrokes, but recognize that there is a developmental changes that take place. But the big buckets seem to be these 5. Some worries and fears, changes in behavior, physiological responses, or how our body reacts, how they focus on events, and particularly as children get older, how it affects their spirituality. When we think about worries and fears after traumatic events, what we find is that children have an increased worry about the safety of themselves and others. Now that will change. Elementary school children, preschool children are more worried about the people they know, the people they love and care about. You know, particularly preschool children really are, I care about me and the people important to me. As children get older, their spheres of worry, their circles of worry seem to change and grow, and so I may worry about children that I don't even know, children that may be similar to me, may live far away, or maybe even a state or community over, but my worry gets bigger, and I start worrying about my own safety, and can this happen to me? If I was directly involved, will it happen again? If I hear about it happening somewhere else, do I need to worry that it's going to come to where I live? And so it can create some anxiety and worry. And think about it, when you're worried about something, how good is your focus on other things? And so we see that it can have an impact on school, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Be aware that oftentimes children may experience guilt and shame in the aftermath of traumatic events, whether it is a natural disaster or a shooting or other kind of man-made events. They get worried that maybe there was something I should have done or could have done differently. They have some guilt and shame about what they did or didn't do. They may have some guilt and shame about the people that were hurt or the people that were killed, in terms of how they may have gotten along with them or not, and their own thoughts and feelings. I know that For example, after Katrina, when children left New Orleans, there were many children that felt like they should have, at 9 or 10 years old, remembered to get the insurance papers and remember to get all the lists of medicines and remember to do all those things that caused more stress for their families. They felt great guilt and shame around that. Sometimes children that even aren't directly involved may feel like there was something they could do different or something they could do to help in a better way. Adults feel the same thing, but for children sometimes it's harder to put into words. Now this one I really want to spend just a little time with. When children are exposed to traumatic events, or when children are really thinking about things that have happened, even if they're not directly affected, and it becomes worrisome to them, what we often see are changes in behavior. So oftentimes we hear things like, gosh, this child is having a hard time sitting still in their desk at school, they're more irritable, they're having problems with their sleep, they're having problems getting along with classmates and peers, they have more temper outbursts or temper tantrums, their attention and concentration are a problem, they're not doing as well in school. And we put all those together, and I will tell you that we have been well trained by the pharmaceutical industry that if we hear about those kinds of behaviors, that we need to quickly ask our doctors for free samples of Strattera or Adderall or Ritalin or Concerta or any of those other medications that help children that have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. What we know is that these reactions are very similar to ADHD. So trauma reactions in terms of behavior and ADHD often look very similar. So it's very important to think about, did these behaviors just start, or have they been there since preschool times? Because you don't wake up one day at 13 and all of a sudden have ADHD for the first time. So it becomes a big puzzle sometimes to try to parse out, is this ADHD or is this maybe the effects of a reaction to a trauma, or how children are coping with extreme stress. And so one of the things we need to be aware of is that good communication between us as parents, with educators, with schools, with our physicians about what may be going on. But to recognize that the other things we see when children are highly stressed, there may be a change in school performance. And so children that may be an AB student now for the first time have made a C, or a child with BCs now for the first time may be not getting their homework done as well and making Ds and Fs. In general, this should rebound as stress goes down. Or as they're coping better. But to recognize that sometimes in the immediate weeks to a month after these events, we may see that dip in school grades. So we have to be aware of it, and there's things we can do in terms of classroom and homework and support. But there's a little group of kids. If your child was a child that was making Bs and C's, and then a stressful situation or a traumatic event occurred, and now all of a sudden they're getting A's, you probably don't call up your guidance counselor, you probably don't call your PTA and say, hey, I need some help, I'm worried about my child, they're starting to make straight A's. But if you see that change in school grades too, think about if there are other things going on. Maybe they're studying all the time, but now they don't want to go play soccer. Now they don't want to go visit with friends. Now they don't want to go to a movie. No, sorry, Mom, I really don't want to go out for ice cream because I might have a pop quiz in a day or two. So if you see big changes, either way, it's usually a dip in grades, but the other side is important to remember as well. Sometimes our bodies react to stress too. So our hearts beat a little faster. We may jump at the sound of a siren that goes by. And for children, they may have more somatic complaints, more headaches or stomach aches, just vague aches and pains. So school nurses may be able to give us some insight there. Are they seeing more kids showing up in their office? But also, you may find as parents that your child doesn't want to go to school, doesn't want to be away from you, and is complaining about not feeling well. And you take them to the doctor, and the doctor says, you know, there's really nothing that I can find. That doesn't mean your child is faking a stomach ache. It means their stomach is really hurting. There's just not a medical reason for it. And it may be related to stress that they're feeling, related to a recent traumatic event that they may have been exposed to or that they're worried about. And finally, and this is oftentimes for children that are directly impacted, there seems to be more of a focus on the event. So they may talk more about it, repeat their stories over and over. You will have some children, particularly as they get older, that tend to withdraw and not want to be around anything that reminds them of that event. I want to talk a little bit about the media in a second. Those last 2 points, trauma reminders and loss reminders, what we're talking about with trauma reminders, let's say that there was an event in the community that occurred, a traumatic event that affected the entire community, and there were sirens and there were helicopters and there were you know, maybe there were other kinds of sights and sounds and smells that are associated. And most people in the community are going to say, gosh, when I hear that sound or smell that or see something, it reminds me of that event. And everybody will have some of the same ones. Those loss reminders are very different. Those loss reminders tend to be unique to the person. So, for example, we've got Thanksgiving coming up, and let's say between last Thanksgiving and this Thanksgiving, grandmother passed away. Grandmother always made the pecan pie for dessert after our big Thanksgiving dinner. And now Thanksgiving is coming, and I'm sort of swamped with that loss reminder that pecan pie won't be there. Somebody else may make it, but it's still not grandma's. Somebody else may make a pumpkin pie, and I really remember the pecan pie. So that's unique to that child, that family. It may not be something that affects other children in the same way. But again, to keep that in mind, oftentimes, again, when there is an event that takes place, it can remind us of other losses that we have had. So maybe I didn't know anybody that was hurt or was killed in the recent shooting, for example, in Las Vegas, but it reminds me of a recent loss that I had, and so I start feeling some of those same kinds of reactions that I did initially with that death in my family. So there are some similarities. And then this is particularly true as we get to older children, adolescents, as they truly begin to question their relationship with God or a higher power. And so it causes them to question beliefs and struggle with sense of fairness and an understanding. I think with adolescents who've experienced a traumatic event, we have to be mindful that this is a really hard time. There's a book, I promise I have not ever read this book, but I love the title so much because it sums up adolescence. The title of the book is Leave Me Alone, But First Can You Take Me and Cheryl to the Mall? That is teenagers in a nutshell. I don't need you, but I still want you, and I still need you. And so as they're struggling to figure out their own sense of independence and autonomy, sometimes they're less likely to tell us what's going on with them if they are really having a hard time coping with an event. And we have to be mindful. It's really hard to skip school when you're in second grade. It's a lot easier when you've got your license and a car. When you're an adolescent, you may be more impulsive and you may see that I can't guarantee tomorrow, so you may engage in more high-risk behaviors. So we need to be particularly attentive in a different way to things that adolescents may experience. When children have experienced trauma, and I include in trauma children that are having a sense of loss and bereavement of someone close to them, we can see that it does impact learning. Research shows us that there may be a decrease in actual IQ or reading skills, lower grade point averages, more school absenteeism, decreased graduation rates, and higher rates of behavior problems, leading to higher rates of expulsions and suspensions. So I truly applaud the fact that the PTA is tackling this topic, because what we know is by working together, educators, parents, and other caregivers taking the time to work with the schools to help children adjust to crisis situations and its aftermath is essential to helping that academic achievement, helping children get back to that learning environment. There are factors that can make a difference in terms of how children are going to cope, how well they're going to do after these types of events. One is how exposed were they? And by exposure, if you put the event in the middle and you draw little ripples from that, how close are they to that center? Did they know someone killed or injured in that event? Was it part of their immediate family? Was it a close friend or relative, somebody they went to school with? So how the level of exposure to those events, the closer the relationship, the closer they are to that epicenter, the higher the risk for challenges. And the media certainly can play a role, and I will spend a little time on that for sure. How quickly children and their parents and caregivers, because I use parents, it may be a foster parent, grandmother, other relative that's raising the child, but how quickly we can reconnect with those caregivers, connect caregivers and children is super important. So good school preparedness plans all look at how to help with that reunification of caregivers and children, making sure parents know where to go for at least 2 different sites, because if the first site that I plan on is compromised, I need to have a backup plan, and at the moment that's not when to look for a backup plan. So as parents, as educators, do you know where those times are? And do we talk to our kids if we get separated for any reason? I was talking to a friend of mine, and she's getting ready to take her child to a Taylor Swift concert, and we talked about how scary it is. She thinks about Las Vegas, and she's living in a completely different state, but there was that moment of, do I go or do I stay? And she decided, yeah, we're going to go. But we talked about just being smart, making sure that you are aware of your environment. Where are the exits? And having a plan for what happens if we get separated. Because sometimes when nothing happens, just because of the large numbers of crowds, Christmas is coming and malls are crowded, you might get separated, making sure that you have a plan of how to reconnect. Routine is very important, so keeping a routine in the aftermath of traumatic and stressful crisis events is necessary. It's not enough just to get back to routine. We need other ways to support our children, but definitely routine happens, and routine is helpful. Believe it or not, the best predictor sometimes of how well a child is going to do in the aftermath of these events is how we're doing as caregivers, how we're doing as parents. So we need to make sure that we're mindful of our own reactions and how we're managing those. It doesn't mean that our children can't see us upset. I think All of us were upset by recent events in Texas, both the shooting as well as the natural disaster. And it's okay for children to see us upset, but what's important is that our children see that we can pull ourselves back together again and give the message that together we can get through this. That's what's important, so children know that you're going to be okay and I can talk to you about this. How well children were doing before these events happen are good predictors of how they're going to do after. And children that have IEPs, children that have special health care needs, children that are involved in mental health services, we need to pay careful attention to, because they may already be having trouble coping with other life circumstances that may be exacerbated by current events. I think about that Kelly Clarkson song, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but she got it wrong. What we know is the more adverse events that we have, particularly as children, the harder it is for us to cope. So we need to make sure that we're providing that support for children that may already have some adverse events going on. Family functioning and stressors that were already present can make things better or worse. If things are doing well, if there's good social and community supports, children tend to do better. The media. My goodness gracious, we are live at so many of these events today because of technology, because of 24/7 news cycles. So children are exposed to the media in many, many ways, whether it's TV, radio, online, through Instagram, through Facebook, through Snapchat. They hear about these things. It is everywhere, and the media is extremely important to provide us with information, but the media can also cover and provide information that can be extremely stressful, and it changes. So what we learned after Oklahoma City and some of our research, and what continues to be borne out, is that the more of this coverage, the more coverage kids watch, the more reactions they endorse. And we don't really have a total understanding of whether I'm more anxious so I watch more, or I watch more and become more anxious, but the bottom line is we need to turn it off. So young children should not be watching this at all, particularly preschool children. They may not always understand things like instant replays. So if you think about the coverage of 9/11 over and over and over again, given how many times it replayed, there shouldn't be a building standing in New York if I don't understand instant replay. But as children get older, they may see some things on TV, turn it off, sit down with them and talk about, what did you think about what you just saw? So it's really important to be able to process it, because I will fill in the blanks as a child of any age with my imagination or misinformation, misunderstandings if I don't understand what's going on. And as adults, we think sometimes, oh, my kid's playing on their iPad, they're not even listening, they're not paying attention to what I've got on the radio or what's on the TV or in the newspapers, but they do hear it. You know, if you're on the phone and you think your kids are in another room and you say, I think I'm going to make meatloaf for dinner, from 3 rooms away, your child screams, I don't want meatloaf for dinner. So they're hearing everything, even when we're not sure that they really are listening. These are some protective factors that can help, and we know that strong relationships with teachers and peers can help. We know that children that participate in at least one extracurricular activity actually do better than children that participate in none. We don't want to overschedule children, and so they don't have a moment of downtime, but having a balance can be really helpful. Children with better social skills and better self-esteem do better, and a willingness to ask for help. Those kinds of things are really important. We've been doing quite a bit of work, for example, recently in school systems, helping to give teachers sort of a set of skills that they can incorporate to help increase positive relationships with the students in their classroom, so that they can do a better job to get the information that they need to get to the students for learning, but also increasing the likelihood that the children will want to learn and will follow directions more readily, and so reduce some of that mild to moderate kind of distress or behavior problems that children may have in the classrooms, because we can't always decide who the child is going to turn to for help in the schools, and it may not be the guidance counselor all the time. They may not know the guidance counselor, but hey, is my history teacher or my math teacher or my homeroom teacher somebody that I feel comfortable talking to? I love Calvin and Hobbes. You put this cartoon in here to say a word about pets. Pet owners will tell you that their pets are part of their family. And for children, pets really do have that very special place. They are the best friend. They're who I go to and cry into the fur. They're who I calm down by petting. So in crisis events, if pets are lost, if pets are killed, if they're separated by pets, that can be very difficult for children and cause an extra added level of distress. So pets can be a very protective factor, but pets can also, if something happens to pets, can be challenging for children. We hear a lot in the news about post-traumatic stress disorder in relation to trauma or crisis events. While that's there, that's not going to be the only reaction to a stressful event or a traumatic event. And even if it is a trauma, that doesn't necessarily mean that children are going to develop post-traumatic stress disorder. We also have to keep in mind that bereavement, grief, can play a major role in how children are coping. And then if there are crisis events, to pay attention to secondary losses and other stressors. If there's a crisis event, did I need to move? Or let's say I'm in a school where lots of children came from a flooded area, and now my school classes are bigger and there's new kids there and I don't know them, or I don't know how to interface with them. What is that like? How do all these secondary losses or stressors impact children? Be mindful that after stressful events, after crisis events, we often get an increase in bullying. So children that may never have bullied before may begin, and children that were never the target of bullying may now be bullied. We certainly had to be aware, for example, talking with schools in different communities after the events in Charlottesville across the country. There was much worry about overt racism and anti-Semitism and hatred, and how children were worried and nervous about what this meant for them, even if they weren't in Charlottesville, Virginia. So, how do we talk to our child? One of the questions that I'm often asked is, do I wait for them to bring it up before I say anything? And I will tell you, the best things we can do is start the conversation with our children. If we wait for them to bring it up, children may assume that we are either A, so distressed that we can't talk about it, or B, maybe we don't know about it and they don't want to upset us. It is really important. If you have a child that goes to school, it is important that we talk to our children about these events, because they will hear about it. They will hear about it from other children in the classroom that may have older siblings or whose parents already talked to them about it. they're walking through the grocery store with you, and now they read and they see headlines on the newsstands. They are flipping channels and they see special reports, or they turn on their computers and they see headline news, or they're on any type of social media and kids are discussing it. So this is a hard one. Take a deep breath and start the conversation. Start the conversation. There was a terrible thing that happened in Texas, and somebody came in and shot and killed people and hurt people in a church. And I wanted to find out from you what you've heard about it and to answer any questions you may have. They are going to hear about it, and if we're not the ones that start the conversation, that also can undermine their sense of trust and faith in us as caregivers. So sometimes kids will say, no, I'm fine, I'm okay. To say, okay, fine, what are your friends saying about this? Because why do we have friends that we have? We have our friends because they think the same way we do. They talk about the same things we talk about. So sometimes giving the child a little space, what are your friends saying about what just happened? And if they haven't heard about it and say, I'm not sure what you're talking about, then you can tell them at a level that they can understand. How I talk to a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old is going to be very different than how I talk to my 15-year-old or 16-year-old. So, you know, the best analogy that I've come up with for this is if a 4-year-old asks you how babies are made, you give them the 4-year-old version. When they're older, you better give them the better version so they really are armed with good knowledge. So again, though, it's important to take a deep breath and to start that conversation, finding out what your child already knows. When you find out what your child already knows, then you're better able to hear what they don't know or what they didn't get right. So it helps us to understand and correct inaccurate information. When my daughter was in elementary school at 9/11, and she knew about the planes that hit the buildings in New York. We were living in Oklahoma at the time. And she knew about the planes that hit the World Trade Center. She knew about all the people that had died and the tower collapsing. But she was really, really scared about the terrorists in Washington, D.C. that had captured an elementary school and were holding them hostage. Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, I didn't hear that. Of course you didn't hear that because it didn't happen. But that was sort of a rumor that got started with a lot of her friends, and that's what they believed. And when we had that conversation when she came home, being able to correct that misinformation and to let her know, indeed, children her age were not being held hostage. So we could begin to have that conversation. Research that came out after the Boston Marathon bombing found that children did much better when their parents had talked to them about what happened than children whose parents tried to shield them from that horrific tragedy. So again, starting the conversation, finding out what they know, correcting inaccurate information, and continuing to circle back around, just checking back in with you to see how you're doing a few times. And when you can start a conversation about something this difficult, you are setting the stage for your child to know, wow, I can talk to my caregiver about anything, which will help if there is bullying, which will help with peer pressure situations, will help with just disappointments that occur as children grow up. Encourage them to ask questions that they have and answer those questions honestly and directly, and sometimes the answer is, I don't know, but I'll do what I can to find out and let you know. So be accurate. When we tell children that I promise this will never happen here, I don't know how we can do that anymore. We can't make that guarantee. We can make the guarantee I am doing everything I know how to do to make sure we're safe. And I know our schools are doing everything that they know how to do to keep us safe. So together in our community, our leaders are working to make sure we're safe. So the chances are good we're going to be okay, but we always are making sure we talk to each other about anything that worries us. These kind of events are often good opportunities to talk about your family's preparedness plan. God forbid there's a fire. Does your child know how to get out of the house? Do they know what to do or where to meet or where to go if your house were on fire? So having those opportunities to talk about, here are some things that we do to keep safe. We change our fire alarm, fire, what's it called? The smoke alarm. Smoke alarm. I completely lost my words. Because that's what we do to make sure that if there is a fire, we'll be safe. So we have those plans, and schools have plans too. We talked about the media exposure. As much as we need to make sure we limit media exposure of all kinds, including social media, make sure as adults we do the same thing. We can get overwhelmed by watching this cycle 24/7 and never taking a break from it either. We've covered some of the common reactions. So once you know what to look for, you're going to be a better surveyor of how your children are doing. You're going to be better able to report and acknowledge any concerns that may be there, may be present. And children look to us as being positive role models. This is really a time after any of these events, particularly man-made traumatic events. When we talk to our children, this is often an opportunity for us to share with our children how we view the world. What is the value? What are the beliefs that you want to help your children foster? You know, schools have kindness campaigns. Schools have all kinds of wonderful things. Being a role model and giving those ideas about how we treat our peers, our classmates, our schoolmates, but also at home too. What can we do? After traumatic events, we need to be a little bit more patient, a little bit more attentive, and show a little bit more love, and that goes a long way to help with coping. Very quickly, just to remember, if children have been directly exposed to any kind of trauma, there may be triggers that they may be doing better, and then they'll have one of these types of triggers. It may be a birthday or a holiday or an anniversary of the event, or a similar event that happens, and they take a step back in their coping, and just to be on the lookout for that. Sometimes we may need some extra supports on this slide, so thinking through that, particularly as the holiday season is approaching. I want to take the next few minutes to just very quickly talk about steps to help children build resilience, helping them sort of bounce back when they are put in a stressful situation or feeling overwhelmed. And these are adapted from work with the American Psychological Association. So I want to share these with you. We know that connections are so important. Children that have close connections with adults, but also have good connections with friends, with other extracurricular activities, the more connections we have, the better we do. So making sure your child has opportunities to make connections, to be with other peers, will help them be able to bounce back from challenges that they face in life. When we help others, we do better. So this is, you know, an idea that even if we're struggling, if we can find a way to just help a little bit, it may be that we're struggling with something that this picture is actually, my daughter's now a young adult, but this was when she was right after 9/11 and was trick-or-treating for the American Red Cross. And it was interesting because she and her friends were really excited to trick-or-treat and earn money for disaster relief. It made them feel like they were doing something to help. But a reporter found out about it and asked them, so you're trick-or-treating for Red Cross instead of getting candy? And they looked at the reporter and said, what? We're trick-or-treating for Red Cross, but we're also getting candy. It's important to remember that children also need to be children, and that adolescence and those kinds of things continue. But thinking about ways through school campaigns or class projects or even just in the neighborhood, are there ways that they can think about helping someone else they do better? It may be as simple as writing a letter to first responders in your community to say, hey, thanks for what you do for us. It may be helping a neighbor shovel snow. It may be anything that allows us to step out and help someone else, we do better. The more you can keep a consistent, predictable routine in your life, the better kids do. If they know that, you know, it may not be the same every day, but I know this is my bedtime routine, this is my school day routine. Kids do better with routine. Routine never hurt anyone. Take a break. Play, laugh, enjoy, go out and take a walk, ride your bike, play with your pets, play with your friends, but just taking a break from the hustle bustle and definitely taking a break from coping and dealing with the aftermath of a traumatic event can be helpful. It's important that we teach children some self-care. So everything from when they're little to how to brush their teeth, to when they're older, how to drive a car, to how to make their own lunches. When children feel positive that they can take care of themselves in some way, that doesn't mean they don't need you, but they're also able to contribute. They do better. Help your children set small goals, not, gosh, I want to make sure that I am ready for the end of the year exams, but maybe I'm going to have a small goal that I want to finish one chapter book, or I want to finish one college application by a certain date, or I want to, you know, be able to, you know, hit a better forehand in tennis. What's a small goal that I can set for myself? I want to make one new friend. So small goals that they can move toward them, and to celebrate and to recognize the small goals as well as the larger goals that they set for themselves. Because when we set small goals and move toward them, we do better and our kids are more resilient. Children that see themselves in a more positive way are more resilient. And a lot of their positive self-image and their view of the world comes from how we treat our children and how they perceive they're treated both at home and at school. And if we can encourage and support and celebrate the strengths and help them with skills to overcome some of their challenges, they are more resilient in the face of stressful and traumatic situations. When we see the world as the glass half full, we do better. Find those opportunities of self-discovery. The child that says, there's no way I can give a book report in front of the class, have them practice and realize they can. They told you, gosh, I could never ride a bike, and look, they're riding a bike. So yep, they can probably give a book report if they practice the little steps, or study for a test, or depending on their age, they all have opportunities to find out that they really are, have these hidden gems that we can help bring out and support. Change happens. Change is part of life. And as much as, again, I'm going to circle back to where we started, we'd like to make it a very smooth journey that nothing happens, but life happens sometimes and there are bumps in the road. And the more we can help children recognize that these truly are bumps, and some bumps feel like giant sinkhole potholes, but if we can be together to help move to the other side, that change is a part of life, but we will be okay. That's what's important to remember. I'll never forget, I talked to a preschooler or a little kindergartner shortly after Katrina that had relocated to Houston, and they were in the hotels and they had their dog with them in the hotel. And I talked to the parents very briefly about what they may expect from their little boy in the aftermath of such a change and devastation to their community and their family home and having to relocate. And then I talked to him and I said, say, hey, how are you doing? Tell me about what's going on. And he said, oh my goodness, I had to change. I have to change schools, and I have to change teachers, and I have to change backpacks and books and homes and friends. And it's a lot of change. And we talked about that for a little bit, and then I asked him, tell me about your dog. Who is this? And he said, well, that's Brownie. But you know what? Brownie has to change too, so his name's going to be Doug. And so we talked a little bit about Doug, and we talked a little bit about all the changes, and we talked about some things that he could do to feel better about all the changes that were coming. And so that's important to help kids understand that change comes whether we want it to or not sometimes, and how we face the change. What are the supports we can provide our children really can help them bounce back in a more positive way. Anytime that you see changes that are significant in your child's behaviors, anytime that you are worried about how your child is doing at home or at school, again, unless you have that manual that I so desperately wanted so long ago and still would like to have a copy of, it's okay to ask for help. There's nothing wrong with that. So you can reach out and ask for help to your pediatrician, your family doctor, your local mental health association, your state psychology association, to ask for that help, just to sometimes give you some reassurance and some guidance. If you are, I want to give you this information. This is from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. It's a free app related to how to help children cope in the aftermath of natural disasters. So it gives you some ideas of what you can say and what you can do in age-appropriate language, some tips. So I encourage you to take a look even at that. These are some resources. The APA, the American Psychological Association, has great resources for families. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network, all of these here have wonderful tips and ideas for children at different ages for different types of traumatic events or natural disasters. So I encourage you to take a look. And again, if you're looking for a mental health expert in your area, the Psychologist Locator or mentalhealth.gov are a good place to start. If you do have a child that has experienced a traumatic event, the important thing to know is that we have exceptionally well-researched scientific interventions and treatments for children that have experienced trauma. Finding a psychologist or other mental health professional with expertise in these interventions will really make a difference. I thank you very much for you spending the time with me this evening or via YouTube. And I think if I timed it right, we have a few minutes left for questions. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for what you do for your children.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Gurwitch, for that wonderful presentation. Again, if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to type it in that comment box in your control panel. We'll give everybody just a minute to type in any questions. Don't see any that are coming in yet. I feel like I can ask you about 100 questions myself. But one thing that you and I were talking about, Dr. Gurwitch, ahead of this is the relentlessness with which it seems like our country and our children have been exposed to traumatic events, maybe not directly, but you know, today what happened in Northern California is another example. And how do our parents, how would you, and again, I think you touched on it in the conversation, but how do you address that? How does a parent address something that there are no words for, it doesn't make any sense, and we ourselves are trying to process it? Just what do you do? What would you recommend as a parent?
I think you're absolutely right. We sometimes have a hard time finding the words, finding what to say. The events that happened today in Northern California, where a shooting again touched an elementary school, brings back Sandy Hook and all our thoughts around that. Thank goodness it was not as tragic in terms of deaths of children as Sandy Hook, but even Sutherland Springs recently. It's really hard. It's almost to the point of, do I turn the news on? Do I want to know? And we begin to get overwhelmed, but your children are going to hear it, and they're going to start feeling overwhelmed. Can I go to church? Can I go to the mall? Can I go to hear music? Can I go to the movies? Can I go to school? Am I going to be okay? And it's really important to sit down, and even a general, sometimes there are things that happen in the world and I wish I had an answer to why. I don't know why, and sometimes we don't understand the why, but what I do know is that I am doing everything, and school is doing everything that we can think of to make sure that you're safe and that you're going to be okay. And if you ever worry about something, or you ever hear something or see something that you're not sure about, who do you talk to at school? You talk to me at home, you talk to your grandmother, your grandfather, whoever the caregivers are, or their trusted people, but make sure that the child knows who do they talk to at school, who can they talk to, who do they trust, so they know that there is an outlet. But again, I think it's really important to get the message across. Hopefully, this is my message that I shared with my daughter, that I truly believe, even in the face of violence and events that I can't understand, I still believe that people are basically good, and people do want to help and take care of and befriend each other. And they come in all colors and ages and religions, and it's important that we look for that as well, and to recognize those strengths and support each other. So if you ever see, we talked about with bullying, if you ever see somebody being bullied, maybe you are worried about stepping in, but that still means you can tell somebody else, so that maybe a grown-up or maybe a teacher or another adult can step in. But we need to make sure that children know how to have a voice.
Great. So a question came in. You mentioned about starting a conversation with children about these traumatic events on the news. At what age do we see kids talking in school about these events?
Kindergarten, preschool. Because again, they may have older siblings that have talked about it. They may overhear conversations that teachers have, and they don't think anybody's heard them in the hallway. They may hear parents on the phone talking about it. They may walk through the room while the parents are watching it on TV. So if your children are going to school, and your school has more than has multiple grades in it, that means there are older kids too that are going to be talking about it in the lunchrooms or in the halls as they're passing by. So what you don't want to have happen is for your child to hear about it, but they never hear it from you. So again, it can be if you have a very young child, it can be as simple as, there was something that happened in Texas, and people that were in a church having a service, somebody came in and hurt some people and killed some people, and you might hear people talking about that. Has anybody said anything to you, or what do you know about that? And they say, I don't know anything. To say, well, I just want you to know it happened. If you're in, Maine, it happened far, far away, and the police and the people in that community are taking care of each other. But I just wanted you to know, if you do hear about it, you can talk to me, because that's my job, is to keep you safe. You can be sure that by late elementary, middle, and high school, they definitely have heard about it, and their friends are talking about it. And so it is really important to talk to your late elementary, middle, and high school children about these events. They are hearing it, they're seeing it in social media, and believe me, some of the information that their friends share isn't always accurate. So just being able to talk and give them the right information is better. It doesn't have to be the gory details, and I wouldn't give the gory details to children at any age. They don't need to have those. It's hard for us as adults to have all of those.
Great. Well, we have reached the top of the hour, so if anyone has any final questions, please go ahead and type them in. Just a reminder that this recording will be available on National PTA's YouTube channel tomorrow morning. So we're also going to be pushing it out on our social media channels. So YouTube, Twitter and Facebook tomorrow. So you can share this with your larger network, and people can view this webinar at their leisure. So Dr. Gerwich and Leslie, we'd really like to thank you both for participating in the webinar today. It was hugely useful, very timely, and much needed. And we would like the opportunity to just continue the conversation. So thank you again for your participation, and thank you for all the attendees, and have a great night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.